Hi, my name is Alex. I want to share a chilling experience that happened during my senior year of college, which still haunts me to this day. It was a crisp October evening when my group of 10 friends decided to go to a Halloween carnival in our town. The event was a much anticipated annual tradition, but this year it held a special significance for us. One of our closest friends, Max, was moving to another city, and this carnival was to be his farewell party. Max had been a central figure in our group, always the life of the party, and it was hard to imagine our gatherings without him. We all agreed that this would be a fitting send-off, a night filled with fun, laughter, and a bit of Halloween mischief. The carnival was set up on the outskirts of town, in a large open field that had been transformed into a vibrant fairground. As we arrived, the colorful lights, eerie decorations, and the mix of spooky and cheerful music set the mood for the night. The air was filled with the scent of popcorn, cotton candy, and autumn leaves. We roamed through the carnival, enjoying the various attractions, the haunted house, Ferris wheel, and the numerous food stalls. Max seemed particularly excited, eagerly trying out every ride and game. His enthusiasm was contagious, and for a few hours it felt like nothing could dampen our spirits. As the night progressed, we decided to split up for a while, planning to regroup later for a final round of festivities. Max, being the adventurous spirit he was, chose to explore some of the less crowded areas of the carnival. He mentioned wanting to check out a new attraction that had recently been added. Our group agreed to meet at the main entrance in an hour, and Max set off, a grin. But as the minutes turned into hours, we started to worry. We tried calling him multiple times, but there was no answer. Our initial concern grew into anxiety as we scoured the carnival grounds, searching for any sign of Max. The carnival, which had been bustling with activity, now seemed eerily quiet. The festive lights cast long shadows, and the once cheerful music had been replaced by an unsettling silence. We checked every corner, every ride, and every food stall. Max was nowhere to be found. As the night wore on, our worry turned into fear. We approached the carnival staff for help, but they seemed unusually unhelpful, offering vague and dismissive responses. It was as if they were hiding something. Carnival seemed to have swallowed Max, leaving no trace behind. By midnight, we were all exhausted and frightened. We reluctantly decided to leave the carnival, hoping that Max would eventually find his way back. The next morning, our attempts to reach him continued to fail. His phone went straight to voicemail, and there was no response from any of his family members. Desperate for answers, I decided to visit Max's house. When I arrived, Max's father answered the door. His demeanor was distant, and his expression was unreadable. When I inquired about Max, his father simply said, "We've moved to another city," and abruptly ended the conversation. The way he said it, with no emotion, sent a chill down my spine. Over the next week, we tried reaching out to Max's new address, but all our letters and messages were returned, marked as unable to forward. It was as if Max and his family had vanished into thin air. No one in town had heard of their new location. No one seemed to know where they had gone. The carnival, once a place of joy and excitement, now stood as a haunting reminder of that night. The thrill of the rides and the excitement of the games had been replaced by an unsettling sense of dread. We couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister had happened at the carnival, something that had led to Max's disappearance. Years have passed since that Halloween night, but the memory of Max's disappearance continues to haunt us. Every time we drive past the carnival grounds, now abandoned and overgrown with weeds, we are reminded of the eerie events of that night. The joy of that final farewell has been overshadowed by the unanswered questions and the feeling of dread that lingers in our hearts. To this day, none of us have been able to move on from the experience. We often discuss what might have happened, trying to piece together the clues that were left behind. But no matter how many theories we come up with, one thing remains certain. Max's disappearance was the result of something dark and unexplained. Something that the carnival held within its twisted, eerie confines. Hi, my name is Sarah, and I'd like to share an unnerving experience I had at a Halloween carnival last year. It was a chilly October evening, and the Halloween spirit was in full swing. Carnival was the talk of the town, boasting haunted houses, spooky mazes, and eerie attractions. I was both excited and apprehensive about going, but I was determined to have a fun night out. I decided to bring my golden retriever Max along. He was a friendly and well-behaved dog, and I thought he would enjoy the carnival atmosphere as much as I would. Max and I set off for the event, anticipating a night filled with laughter and fright. As we arrived at the carnival grounds, the vibrant lights and festive decorations created a stark contrast to the crisp, dark autumn night. The smell of caramel apples and roasted peanuts filled the air, mingling with the sound of carnival games and eerie music. Max wagged his tail excitedly as we walked through the entrance, eyes wide with curiosity. Carnival was bustling with people dressed in all sorts of costumes. I made sure to keep Max on a leash as the crowd was dense, and I didn't want him to get overwhelmed or lose track of me. We explored various attractions, from the haunted house to the eerie fun house, enjoying the spectacle of it all. Things started to take a turn when we entered a particularly dark and unsettling part of the carnival. It was an area marked the Spooky Maze, which promised a terrifying experience. As we ventured in, the dim lighting and strange, unsettling noises created an atmosphere of foreboding. Max, who was usually calm, started to grow agitated. His ears were perked up, and he seemed to be on high alert. We navigated through the maze, encountering various spooky setups and animatronic creatures. Despite the frights, I found myself enjoying the thrill. However, Max's anxiety was growing more apparent. He was barking and pulling on his leash, clearly disturbed by something I couldn't see. As we reached the end of the maze, we came across a seemingly abandoned section of the carnival. There were no other visitors around, and the area was eerily quiet. Max suddenly became frantic, barking uncontrollably and trying to pull me away. I tried to calm him down, but he was insistent on leaving the area. That's when I noticed something unusual. In the dim light, I could make out a figure standing in the shadows. The figure was barely visible, but I could see that it was tall and shrouded in darkness. It seemed to be watching us intently. I felt a chill run down my spine and tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was just a trick of the light or a part of the carnival's scare tactic. Max's behavior became more erratic as we continued through the carnival. He was visibly scared, and his barking was becoming increasingly frantic. I decided to cut our visit short and head home. As we walked back towards the entrance, I noticed that the carnival seemed quieter than before. The lively atmosphere had given way to an unsettling silence. When we reached the parking lot, I glanced back at the carnival grounds. To my horror, the figure I had seen earlier seemed to be following us. It was difficult to make out any details, but it appeared to be moving slowly in our direction. My heart raced as I quickened my pace, anxious to get Max and myself to safety. Back at home, I was relieved to be away from the carnival. Max was still agitated, pacing around and whining. I tried to calm him down, but he was clearly traumatized by what we had experienced. As the days went by, my health began to deteriorate. I felt increasingly weak and unwell, experiencing frequent dizziness and fatigue. My doctor couldn't pinpoint the cause, attributing it to stress or perhaps a lingering virus. 2 weeks later, driven by a sense of unresolved fear and curiosity, I returned to the carnival grounds. To my surprise, the carnival was still in operation, though the atmosphere felt different. The vibrant lights and cheerful noises from before were now tinged with an unsettling edge. I walked through the same eerie section of the carnival, hoping to confront or understand what I had experienced. As I reached the area where Max had become agitated, I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to steady my nerves. The noise and lights seemed to blur together, creating an almost hypnotic effect. When I opened my eyes, the figure from that night was gone. The area was as it should be, with no signs of anything out of the ordinary. I left the carnival feeling a mixture of relief and lingering dread. I could only hope that no one else would have to face the same unsettling experience I had endured. Hi, my name is Finn, and I'm 25 years old. I want to share an unsettling experience I had one Halloween when I visited my grandparents in their quaint village. I was expecting a pleasant and nostalgic trip, but what I encountered was far from the peaceful visit I had imagined. It was a crisp October afternoon when I arrived at my grandparents' picturesque farmhouse nestled in the heart of the countryside. The drive had been long. The sight of the old homestead, with its charming red barn and sprawling fields, made it worthwhile. My grandparents, Ellen and George, welcomed me with their usual warmth, and the aroma of Ellen's famous apple pie filled the air. We spent the evening catching up and reminiscing about old times. The conversation flowed easily, and the cozy atmosphere was a comforting reminder of my childhood visits. However, as we enjoyed our dinner, Ellen excitedly mentioned that the village was hosting its annual Halloween carnival the following day. The next day, Ellen and George were eager to attend the carnival, and I reluctantly agreed to go along. The village was buzzing with excitement as the carnival came to life. The open field where the event was held had been transformed into a vibrant fairground. Colorful lights illuminated the area, and the smell of popcorn and cotton candy wafted through the air. Despite the festive appearance, there was something strange about the carnival. The decorations were a mix of cheerful and eerie. Jack-o'-lanterns with flickering lights, tattered ghost figures, and creepy clowns. The rides seemed to have a worn, unsettling quality to them, with creaking Ferris wheels and dilapidated carousel horses. As the day progressed, an unsettling feeling began to creep over me. The cheerful sounds of the carnival seemed muted, and the air was oddly cold. The once friendly decorations now seemed to cast long, distorted shadows. The laughter of children and the music from the rides took on an eerie tone, as if they were distorted by some unseen force. Ellen and George were having a great time, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I wandered off to explore the carnival on my own, hoping to distract myself from the growing sense of dread. As I roamed the less crowded parts of the carnival, I stumbled upon a section that seemed completely out of place. It was a small, dimly lit tent labeled Fortune Teller. Curious, I decided to step inside. The interior was filled with strange artifacts, crystal balls, tarot cards, and incense burning in the corner. Fortune Teller, an old woman with piercing eyes and a crooked smile, greeted me. Her voice was soft, but there was something unsettling about it. She asked if I wanted a reading, and despite my growing apprehension, I agreed. As she laid out the cards, her gaze never left mine. She spoke in cryptic phrases about shadows lurking in the corners of my life and warnings about unseen dangers. I left the tent feeling more uneasy than before. I tried to brush it off as mere theatrics. Returning to the main area of the carnival, I noticed that the once cheerful atmosphere had taken on a darker tone. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the carnival grounds. The rides, which had seemed harmless before, now looked menacing and distorted. I tried to find Ellen and George, but they were nowhere to be found. Panic set in as I searched for them amidst the now foreboding carnival. The crowd had thinned, and the once lively sounds had been replaced by an eerie silence. It was as if the carnival had become a ghost town. I was about to give up hope when I heard a faint, distant cry for help. I followed the sound, my heart pounding in my chest. Carnival grounds seemed to stretch endlessly, and the familiar sights now looked alien and menacing. I finally reached the source of the cry, a small, dilapidated carousel at the edge of the carnival. The ride was moving slowly on its own, the horses' faces twisted in grotesque expressions. I could barely make out Ellen and George, trapped inside the carousel's confined space, their faces etched with fear. Desperate to help, I reached for the controls. They were locked tight. The carnival seemed to mock my attempts to rescue them, as if it were a living entity determined to keep them trapped. Just as I thought all hope was lost, the fortune teller's words echoed in my mind. Shadows lurking. Unseen dangers. I realized that the carnival itself might be the source of the malevolence. With renewed determination, I forced the carousel to stop and managed to free Ellen and George. We fled the carnival as quickly as we could, not daring to look back. The once vibrant and festive grounds had become a nightmarish maze, with the laughter and music replaced by an oppressive silence. When we finally reached home, Ellen and George were in shock, but they were safe. We never spoke of the carnival again, and it remained a dark memory that we all chose to forget. The village returned to its peaceful state, but the horror of that Halloween carnival lingered in our minds. Hi, my name is Jake and I'm 23. I remember one particular Halloween that I'd like to forget, involving a babysitting job that turned into a real nightmare. It was a crisp October evening, and I had been hired to babysit a 16-year-old boy named Liam. His parents were going out for the night, and despite his age, they still wanted someone to keep an eye on him. Liam was a bit of a nervous wreck. At 16, he was anxious and easily spooked, which was ironic considering I had been hired to babysit him. His parents had arranged for me to be there while they went out for their annual Halloween party. They warned me that Liam was scared of almost everything related to Halloween, from creepy decorations to spooky sounds. The evening started off uneventfully. Liam and I had dinner, and I tried to make him feel comfortable. Despite his apprehension, he reluctantly agreed to go with me to the local Halloween carnival. His parents thought it would be a good way for him to face his fears, and they encouraged us to go. As we arrived at the carnival, the atmosphere was electric, the excitement of Halloween. The streets were filled with trick-or-treaters, and the carnival grounds were decorated with an array of spooky sights, ghostly figures, eerie music, and fog machines, creating a ghostly ambiance. I tried to reassure Liam, who was already looking pale and uneasy. The carnival had all the classic attractions: haunted houses, creepy clowns, and a maze of mirrors. We decided to start with some of the less frightening activities, like the pumpkin carving booth and a relatively tame fortune teller. Despite my efforts to make it a pleasant experience, Liam's anxiety was palpable. He clung to my side, his eyes darting nervously at every passing shadow and creepy sound. Liam's fear grew as the night progressed. When we reached the haunted house attraction, he was visibly shaking. I tried to calm him, suggesting we could skip it, but he insisted on going through. His parents had said it was good for him to face his fears, so I didn't want to let him down. As we entered the haunted house, the dimly lit corridors and unsettling noises only heightened Liam's distress. The actors inside were dressed as ghoulish creatures and moved unpredictably through the dark rooms. Liam's breathing became rapid, and he kept clutching my arm, nearly dragging me along as we stumbled through the maze. At one point, while navigating a particularly dark section of the haunted house, Liam froze, his face contorted in terror. Out of the darkness, a figure dressed as a Grim Reaper lunged at us, complete with a scythe and glowing eyes. Liam screamed and nearly toppled over, causing a commotion. I struggled to calm him, but his fear was overwhelming. We finally made it out of the haunted house, but the damage had been done. Liam was trembling and on the verge of tears. He wanted to go home immediately. The carnival was still crowded and chaotic. I tried to soothe him, offering to take him to a quieter part of the carnival, but the experience had left him too shaken to enjoy anything. When we returned to Liam's house, parents were waiting anxiously. I recounted the events of the night, emphasizing that I had tried my best to make it enjoyable, despite Liam's fear. However, it became clear that they were not pleased with how the night had turned out. They felt that my efforts to encourage Liam to face his fears had backfired, and they were upset that I hadn't been able to manage his anxiety better. The following day, I received a message from Liam's parents informing me that they would no longer be needing my services. They were dissatisfied with how the night went and felt that I had not handled the situation as well as they had hoped. It was a harsh blow, and I felt a pang of guilt for not being able to make the night a better experience for Liam. Reflecting on that night, I realized that despite my best intentions, sometimes things just don't go as planned. Liam's fear of Halloween was deeper than I had anticipated, and the carnival, with its dark attractions and unsettling atmosphere, had been too overwhelming for him. The experience taught me a lot about the importance of understanding and accommodating people's fears and anxieties. While it was a disappointing outcome, I learned valuable lessons about empathy and patience, which have stayed with me ever since. Even now, as Halloween approaches, I can't help but remember that night and the lesson it taught me. The carnival, with all its spooky fun, turned into a personal horror story for Liam and me, leaving me with a lasting impression of the fragility of fear and the challenges of facing it head-on. Hi, my name is Dylan. I'm not one for crowds or chaotic events, So when my friends begged me to join them at the Halloween carnival, I was hesitant. I agreed, only to keep the peace. But as the night wore on, I regretted my decision. The carnival, known for its eerie reputation, had a way of making even the bravest souls uneasy. It was a chilly October evening when I arrived at the entrance of Holloway's Carnival, a notorious Halloween event that promised thrills and chills. The entrance was flanked by dilapidated carnival signs and grotesque decorations that set an unsettling tone. The air was thick with fog, and the distant sound of eerie carnival music only added to my growing sense of unease. As I walked through the entrance, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The usual sounds of laughter and excitement were muffled, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to envelop the entire place. The fog swirled around me, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. My friends had been urging me to check out the funhouse, so I reluctantly made my way there. The funhouse, marked by a tattered sign that read "Funhouse of Horrors," seemed even more foreboding in the dim light. As I entered, I was greeted by the unsettling sound of creaking floors and the distant echoes of distorted laughter. Inside, the funhouse was a maze of mirrors and disorienting corridors. The reflections twisted and contorted, creating the illusion of endless passages. The further I ventured, the more disoriented I became. Air grew colder, and I began to feel a growing sense of dread, as if I were being watched by unseen eyes. After escaping the funhouse, I decided to grab a bite to eat. The food stands were eerily deserted, with only a few vendors who seemed more interested in their own conversations than in serving customers. One stand, labeled "Creepy Concessions," caught my eye. It had an old-fashioned cash register and a menu that seemed stuck in a bygone era. While waiting for my food, I noticed a strange booth that hadn't been there before. The sign read, "The Fortune Teller's Tent," and the entrance was shrouded in dark, tattered curtains. Driven by curiosity, I decided to enter the tent. Inside the tent, the air was thick with the smell of incense and the dim glow of flickering candles. The fortune teller, an old woman with an enigmatic presence, beckoned me to sit at her table. Despite my apprehension, I complied, and she began to lay out tarot cards and read my fortune. Her predictions were cryptic and unsettling, filled with ominous warnings and dark omens. As she spoke, her voice grew increasingly frantic. I felt a chill run down my spine. The fortune teller's eyes seemed to pierce through me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she knew something I didn't. Before I could react, the lights in the tent flickered and went out. The darkness was suffocating, and I heard the fortune teller's voice growing distant, her words merging into a chaotic jumble of whispers and screams. I stumbled out of the tent, desperate to find my way back to the carnival's main area. When I rejoined the carnival, everything had changed. Paths that had been familiar were now twisted and unfamiliar. Carnival seemed to have rearranged itself, with rides and attractions in new locations. The fog had thickened, and the once bright lights now cast eerie shadows. As I tried to find my friends, I noticed that the carnival grounds seemed to be closing in around me. The air grew heavier, and the distant sounds of carnival music had been replaced by an oppressive silence. Panic set in as I realized that I was completely disoriented and alone. In a state of growing desperation, I tried to find my way to the exit. The carnival seemed to be a labyrinth, with paths that led me in circles and dead ends that only added to my frustration. The fog made it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead, and the whispers and distant screams grew louder. Eventually, I stumbled upon a massive gate that wasn't there before. It was adorned with rusted iron and locked tight. I felt a surge of panic as I realized that I was trapped. The whispers grew more insistent, and the carnival seemed to close in around me. In a final, frantic attempt to escape, I climbed over the gate and fled into the night. As I looked back, the carnival seemed to vanish into the fog, leaving no trace of its existence. The once vibrant lights and sounds were replaced by an oppressive silence. I never spoke of that night again, and the memory of Holloway's Carnival remains a dark and haunting chapter in my life. The experience left me with a deep sense of unease, and I've often wondered what truly happened that night. All I know is that sometimes, curiosity can lead you to places you should never explore. As the night wore on, we made our way to the abandoned funhouse. a decrepit structure that looked like it had been left untouched for years. The entrance was shrouded in cobwebs, and the sign creaked ominously in the wind. I hesitated, but Monak's excited plea to go in pushed me forward. Inside, the funhouse was a labyrinth of dark corridors and flickering lights. The mirrors on the walls distorted our reflection, creating a sense of disorientation. Shadows danced in the corners, and the air was thick with a musty, old smell. I could hear Monarch's voice echoing in the darkness, but my father's reassuring presence was strangely absent. As we ventured deeper into the funhouse, the atmosphere grew increasingly unsettling. The mirrors seemed to close in on us, and strange noises echoed from every direction. I called out for my father, but there was no response. Panic began to set in as I realized we were completely alone. Monarch's excitement turned to fear as we wandered through the maze-like corridors. Funhouse seemed to stretch on endlessly, with no exit in sight. Eerie laughter from earlier had been replaced by a suffocating silence. My heart raced as I tried to find a way out. Every turn led us further into the maze. After what felt like hours of wandering, we finally stumbled upon a door marked Exit. I rushed through it, only to find ourselves outside the carnival grille, far from the entrance. Fog had thickened, and the carnival lights were now dim and distorted, casting eerie shadows. We finally found my father, who had been frantically searching for us. He explained that he had become separated from us in the funhouse and had been trying to find us ever since. We left the carnival, my nerves frayed, and my fear more palpable than ever. As we drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. Carnival, with its creepy clowns, haunted attractions, and the abandoned funhouse, had been more terrifying than I had anticipated. The experience left me with a deep-seated unease that lingered long after the night ended. I never did manage to fully enjoy Halloween after that night, and the memory of Holloway's Carnival remains a haunting reminder of the fear and fate. Despite the fun and excitement that my father and Manak experienced, the night had been a personal nightmare for me, one I would never forget. Hi, my name is Justin, and I've never been a fan of Halloween carnivals. The crowds, the noise, and the over-the-top decorations always felt overwhelming to me. But when my cousins, Emily and Jake, insisted that I join them for the annual Halloween carnival, I couldn't bring myself to refuse. They were excited, and I didn't want to be the odd one out. So I reluctantly agreed to go with them, unaware of the horrors that awaited. It was a crisp October evening when we arrived at the carnival. The sky was dark, illuminated only by the eerie glow of orange and purple lights strung across the carnival ground. The usual cacophony of laughter, screams from rides, and carnival music filled the air. To me, it felt more like a scene from a nightmare than a fun night out. Emily and Jake were in high spirits, darting from one attraction to another. They dragged me along despite my growing sense of unease. We started with the classic haunted house, a dark, winding maze filled with ghoulish figures and unsettling sound. As we moved through, I tried to keep my composure, but the atmosphere of dread was palpable. Dim lights and unsettling noises were enough to make my skin crawl. After the haunted house, we wandered towards a section of the carnival that seemed less crowded. There was a fortune teller's tent, entrance draped in tattered fabric and glowing with a soft, ominous light. Emily and Jake were eager to have their fortunes read, but I was hesitant. Something about the tent's appearance made me uneasy. Reluctantly, I followed them inside. The fortune teller was an old woman with a gnarled face and piercing eyes. She greeted us with a crooked smile and invited us to sit. As she shuffled her tarot cards, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. When it was my turn, she looked at me with a deep, unsettling gaze and warned me of a dark presence that would soon reveal itself. I laughed off her warnings as part of the carnival's gimmick, but her words lingered in the back of my mind. We moved on to the carnival rides, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling from the fortune teller's tent. Ferris wheel loomed overhead, cabin swaying slightly in the wind. Despite my reluctance, Emily and Jake insisted we take a ride. As we ascended, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. From the top, the carnival looked like a chaotic maze of lights and shadows. But it wasn't the view that unsettled me. It was the feeling of being watched. I glanced around, trying to ignore the sensation, but it grew stronger as the ride continued. By the time we reached the ground, I was visibly shaken. As the night progressed, the carnival started to thin out. Crowds lessened, and the once vibrant atmosphere became eerily quiet. We decided to explore a less popular area of the carnival, where an old, decrepit funhouse stood. The entrance was partially obscured by overgrown weeds and flickering lights. We hesitated for a moment, but eventually decided to enter. The funhouse was dark and filled with strange mirrors and eerie sound effects. As we wandered through the twisted corridors, I noticed a man lingering in the shadows. He wore a ragged costume and had an unsettling presence. His eyes followed us, and he seemed to appear and disappear at will. I tried to brush off the encounter, but my anxiety grew as the night wore on. Emily and Jake seemed oblivious to the man's presence, lost in their own excitement. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. As we were about to leave the funhouse, the man appeared again, this time blocking our exit. His eyes were cold and unblinking, and his movements were unnervingly slow. I could feel my heart racing as he advanced towards us, his intentions unclear. Panic set in as we tried to find another way out. Corridors seemed to twist and turn, leading us deeper into the maze. The man followed us, his footsteps echoing ominously. In our desperation, we finally managed to find an exit and fled into the open air. Breathing heavily, we made our way back to the main entrance of the carnival. As we reached the exit, the man was nowhere to be seen. The carnival was now eerily quiet, with only a few stragglers remaining. We reported the strange encounter to the staff, but they dismissed it as part of the carnival's spooky atmosphere. The next day, the carnival was gone. The field where it had been set up was empty, with no trace of the attractions or decorations. We returned to the site, hoping to find answers, but there was nothing. No remnants of the carnival, no signs of the man we had encountered. We reported the incident to the authorities, but they found no evidence or witnesses. It was as if the carnival had vanished into thin air. The unsettling feeling from the night before lingered, and the memory of the man in the shadows haunted me. Years have passed since that Halloween night, but the experience still haunts me. Every October, as the days grow shorter and the nights grow colder, I can't help but remember the unsettling events of that night. The carnival, which was supposed to be a fun and festive experience, turned into a chilling reminder of how quickly things can go wrong. I've come to accept that some things are beyond explanation. The carnival remains a haunting chapter in my life. Reminder of how the line between enjoyment and fear can be disturbingly thin. Hi, my name is Lucas, and I want to share a bone-chilling experience I had when I was 26 years old. It was supposed to be a fun night at a local carnival, but what transpired was something that still haunts me to this day. It was a cool October evening when the carnival came to town. The streets were decorated with cobwebs, pumpkins, and Halloween-themed lights. My friends and I, Tina, Mark, and Lisa, decided to check it out. We were excited, looking forward to the rides, games, and the festive atmosphere. The carnival had a reputation for being family-friendly and full of classic attractions, so we didn't think twice about it. As we approached the entrance, the carnival looked inviting with its colorful tents and flashing lights. We bought tickets and made our way in, greeted by the scent of popcorn and cotton candy mixed with a hint of something else. Something almost metallic. Despite the festive decorations, there was a strange feeling in the air. We shrugged it off and proceeded to explore. Our first stop was the funhouse, a maze of mirrors and distorted reflections. Inside, we laughed and joked as we tried to navigate the confusing hallways. However, a sense of unease began to creep in. The mirrors seemed to shift and twist in odd ways, and for a brief moment I thought I saw a shadowy figure darting behind us. I dismissed it as an overactive imagination. Next, we moved on to the haunted house attraction. The exterior was decorated with eerie lights and spooky sound effects. As we entered, atmosphere grew darker and colder. The haunted house was filled with actors dressed as ghouls and ghosts, and while they startled us, it was all in good fun. Something felt off. One of the actors had eyes that seemed too intense, too real. I brushed it aside as part of the act. After the haunted house, we decided to grab some snacks. We headed to a food stand where a grizzled man was serving cotton candy and hot dog. There was something unsettling about him. His eyes were sunken, and his smile was too wide. We all noticed it, but tried to ignore it as we bought our treats. As we walked away from the food stand, we passed a tent with a fortune teller sign. I suggested we get our fortunes read for fun, and everyone agreed. The inside of the tent was dimly lit with candles and filled with the smell of incense. A fortune teller, an elderly woman with long silver hair and piercing eyes, welcomed us in. One by one, we sat at her table. When it was my turn, I felt a chill run down my spine as she looked at me with an intensity that made me uneasy. She told me that my future was fraught with danger and darkness, but I dismissed it as just part of the carnival's gimmick. Carnival continued to be enjoyable until late in the evening. We decided to go on the Ferris wheel, which offered a spectacular view of the carnival, lit up against the dark sky. As we reached the top, I noticed something strange. A dark, shadowy figure standing near the edge of the carnival grounds seemed to be watching us intently. When we got off the Ferris wheel, Tina suggested we check out the spooky maze, popular attraction. The maze was a labyrinth of dark corridors and creepy props. We entered and soon we were separated. The maze was so disorienting that it felt like we were walking in circles. I called out to my friends, but there was no response. As I made my way through the maze, I stumbled upon a small dimly lit room that was not part of the attraction. Inside, I found an old wooden box with a padlock. Curiosity got the better of me, and I managed to open it. Inside was an assortment of old photographs and a journal. The photographs were of people who looked terrified, and the journal contained frantic, disjointed entries about someone being trapped and seeking escape. The final entry was a chilling message: "They are watching." I felt a growing sense of dread and hurried back to find my friends. When I finally found them, they were as shaken as I was. Lisa mentioned that she had seen a shadowy figure following us, and Mark had heard whispers that made his skin crawl. We decided it was time to leave, but as we made our way out, Carnival seemed to come alive with an unsettling energy. The lights flickered, and the laughter and music from earlier were replaced with an eerie silence. We saw the fortune teller standing at the edge of the carnival, gaze fixed on us. She seemed to be mouthing something. We couldn't make out the words. As we exited the carnival grounds, the grizzled food vendor appeared from the shadows, blocking our way. His eyes were wide, and he mumbled incoherently about the cursed night and escape while you can. We pushed past him and quickly got into our car. The drive home was filled with a tense silence. The events of the night weighed heavily on us, and we couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. When we arrived back at my house, we were all exhausted and on edge. The next morning, I decided to look up more information about the carnival. What I discovered was chilling. Carnival had a history of strange disappearances and unexplained phenomena. Many people had reported unsettling experiences similar to ours, and there were rumors of a dark past involving occult practices and sinister rituals. As I delved deeper, I found out that the carnival had been associated with a series of unsolved disappearances and accidents over the years. The fortune teller's warning seemed more ominous in light of this information. The carnival never returned to our town, and we never saw the fortune teller, the grizzled vendor, or the shadowy figure again. The experience left us with lasting fear and a sense of unease. We were fortunate to have escaped the carnival unharmed, but the memories of that night continue to haunt us. Every October, when the carnival season rolls around, I am reminded of that eerie night. The darkness, foreboding warnings, and the unsettling figures remain etched in my memory. The carnival was meant to be a place of fun and excitement, but it turned into a night of terror that none of us will ever forget. Hi, my name is Mark, and I want to share a haunting experience I had during the Halloween carnival a few years ago. I was 19 at the time, college student looking for a bit of Halloween fun. Little did I know this would turn into a night of inexplicable horror that still haunts me. Carnival was set up in an old park near my hometown, and it was advertised as one of the most thrilling Halloween events of the season. Promised spooky fun, with attractions ranging from haunted houses to magic shows. The air was filled with the scent of caramel apples and popcorn, and the sounds of carnival games and laughter echoed through the park. My friends and I, Tom, Lisa, and Jenny, were excited to dive into the festivities. We started our night at the haunted house, which was styled as the House of Hilarious Horrors. The entrance was adorned with fake cobwebs and plastic skeletons, and a jester with a comically large hat and exaggerated grin welcomed us. We chuckled at his jokes and goofy antics, but as we stepped inside, the atmosphere changed dramatically. The initial rooms were filled with playful scares. Fake ghosts floated by, and actors in exaggerated monster costumes jumped out from hidden corners. It was all in good fun until we reached the second room, where a magician was performing tricks. His act was supposed to be humorous, but there was something off about him. His movements were too smooth, and his eyes seemed vacant, as though he was somewhere else entirely. The magician's tricks were impressive, but his behavior was unsettling. He pulled a rabbit out of a hat, and while the rabbit appeared calm, it had a strange, almost lifeless quality to it. The atmosphere grew heavier as we moved through the haunted house, and the playful scares began to feel more ominous. By the third room, the haunted house had shifted from lighthearted fun to something genuinely disturbing. The actors dressed as ghouls and goblins started to seem more real than theatrical. Their faces were smeared with realistic blood and grime, and their laughter had turned from playful to sinister. Tom, who had been trying to scare us with his fake screams, was now visibly uneasy. The fourth room was a dark corridor with flickering lights and eerie sound. We heard faint crying and children's laughter, which grew increasingly unsettling as we walked. The corridor seemed to stretch on endlessly, and the air grew colder with each step. Lisa suddenly screamed, and we turned to see what had startled her. At the end of the hallway stood a scarecrow with a burlap sack for a face. Its clothes were tattered, and its movements were slow and deliberate. Its gaze followed us with an unnerving intensity. We tried to laugh it off, but the scarecrow's presence was terrifyingly real. We decided it was time to leave, but as we turned back, the hallway seemed to twist and distort. The exits were no longer visible, and the walls seemed to close in around us. Panic set in, and we stumbled through the maze, desperately trying to find our way out. The scarecrow's laughter echoed through the corridors, haunting melody that grew more distorted with each passing moment. Finally, we stumbled into an open area, a room filled with mirrors. First, the mirrors seemed like a fun addition, reflecting our frightened faces in amusing ways. But as we looked closer, we realized that some of the reflections were moving independently. They grinned and made faces that didn't match our expressions. It was as though the mirrors were showing us something that wasn't quite real. In the center of the room stood a magician's stage with an old, ornate trunk. The magician from earlier was now performing on stage, but his act had taken a dark turn. Instead of pulling out playful items, he produced unsettling objects. A bloody glove, a worn-out photograph of a family, and a rusted knife. The items seemed to hold a dark, personal significance, and their appearance heightened our sense of dread. The magician's performance grew increasingly disturbing. The items he produced seemed to have a life of their own, and his eyes were now filled with a malevolent glint. The air around us grew colder, and the laughter that had once been playful was now tinged with a sinister edge. Desperate to escape the haunted house, we finally found an exit. We burst out into the cool night air, our hearts pounding with fear. We looked around and noticed that the carnival was still bustling with activity. People were laughing and enjoying themselves, oblivious to the horrors we had just experienced. As we made our way out of the carnival, we encountered a group of people gathered around the haunted house entrance. They were discussing their own unsettling experiences and sightings of the scarecrow. Some claimed that the scarecrow had followed them outside, lingering in the shadows. Carnival staff were nowhere to be seen, and the atmosphere grew increasingly eerie. In the days that followed, we couldn't shake the images of the haunted house from our minds. The disturbing reflections, the unsettling scarecrow, and the dark, magical elements left us with a lingering sense of unease. We later learned that the carnival had a history of disturbing incidents, disappearances, strange occurrences, and unexplained phenomena. The haunted house was known for its unsettling atmosphere and was rumored to have a dark past. The experience left a lasting impression on us. Whenever Halloween rolls around, I remember that night vividly. The carnival had promised entertainment and fun, but what we experienced was a haunting reminder that sometimes the line between amusement and terror is frighteningly thin. To this day, I still have nightmares about that night. The carnival was supposed to be a place of joy and celebration, but it revealed a darker side that I could never have imagined. The mirrors in the haunted house seemed to hold a reflection of something sinister, and the scarecrow's presence was a constant reminder that not everything is as it seemed. I've often wondered if there was something more to the carnival than just a Halloween attraction. The unsettling magic, the disturbing performances, and the chilling encounters left me with a deep sense of dread. The carnival promised laughter and fun, but what we experienced was a night of pure, unfiltered horror that I will never forget.